Designcast Podcast, the podcast for design and STEAM educators.
Hello and welcome to Designcast, a podcast where I interview a wide range of excellent guests in design and STEAM education to get their unique perspectives. My name is Jason Reagan, and I use my 20 plus years of experience as a design educator to dig deep into complex issues. This podcast has one simple mission: to create a community of people around the world that are interested in design and STEAM education. Each episode, I chat with guests from all corners of the design world, from classroom teachers to authors and even to educational consultants. We discuss a wide range of topics that we feel are relevant today. I do want to ask you that if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review, rate, subscribe, share, or download from your favorite podcasting app. This helps the podcast get discovered by listeners that might not find it otherwise. Also, it helps me to continually define the direction of future guests and episodes. Feel free to drop by my website, www.jasonreagan.ga, to leave me a comment or to sign up to be considered as a future guest on future episodes. Also, don't forget to stop by Anchor and leave me a voice clip that could even end up in an upcoming show. Thanks for listening, so let's get to it. Welcome back to another episode of Designcast, and I'm absolutely pleased and excited to have Andrew Nicholls with me. Andrew, how are you today?
I'm well. Yourself?
I'm hanging in there, man. And so before we started, we were just talking about the current lockdown you guys are under, and so that is a real shame. But that does mean that I have a captive audience to chat with you, so that's a plus.
Certainly do.
Andrew, if you don't mind, could you tell the listeners a little bit about, number one, who you are and kind of how you became involved in education?
Sure. So I'm Andrew Nicholls. I am a design and technology leader. That essentially just means that in the school that I'm currently teaching in, I'm classed as a leading teacher. So I'm basically just the head of faculty and look after the curriculum and provide support to the staff within the school who teach design and technology, and also some of our VET or vocational education and training. I got into teaching about 16 years ago. I actually first started out as an industrial designer at the end of the 90s and just at the turn of the century. And that was a really interesting time here in Victoria. We transitioned from a very rough period with the economy, and we had a mass exodus of our manufacturing sector. Obviously went over to China, and that left a lot of industrial designers here with not a lot of jobs to go into. So I ended up finding myself at the time working as a part-time photographic sales consultant, and then sort of heading into industrial design, but wasn't all that much out there. A lot of the businesses at the time didn't really quite understand how to work with industrial designers. We just seemed to have this different way of thinking and turning problems into these really unique and out of the box ways of solving problems. And for a lot of people, that sort of thought, oh, gee, hang on, that's not the way I thought that would go, or that solution could come about. Bit risky going that way. I thought we'd more go that way. So we're really unique coming out onto the market. And when you said you were an industrial designer, most people thought you designed factories. So one of my first jobs was cardboard point of sale. So we actually manufactured and turned big sheets of cardboard into display holders for everything from chocolate bars to books and all sorts of other things. I learned as much as I could from that, and ended up then going into kitchen design and a bit of project management. And somewhere around that time, I met a lovely young lady. And after changing jobs a few times after 6 months, she sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, we'd really like to settle down and maybe buy a house, but banks won't sort of look at you when you're changing jobs every 6 months. So she suggested that I become a teacher, and that's what I did. So I went back and did a very short diploma of education, or graduate diploma of education. And I was fortunate at the time that the University of Melbourne was offering teaching methods in both arts and also technology. And I thought, well, what the heck? I'll throw my hat in the ring and give it a try. And lo and behold, I became a design and technology teacher. Originally, I actually started out teaching visual communication. So that was a rehash of the old tech drawing classes and sort of mixed in with a bit of graphic design as well. And after a few years of teaching that at one particular school, I went off to another and then finally got to teach design and technology, and eventually ended up with another school and was asked to turn an empty shell of a brand new building into a design and technology facility. So I gladly picked that one up and then suddenly found out that there were very few resources around for designing design and technology facilities. And of course, this was a brand new facility that also wanted the design to encompass multiple materials. And that was really unique. And that started my journey into, the leadership of design and technology, and also started my path down the occupational health and safety aspects of design and technology in schools, which eventually led on to 2 master's degrees in those areas.
Quite a journey. And I just want to focus on the part where you said there's not a lot of resources to set these spaces up. And I can tell you that that's one of the number one things we discuss on this podcast is how'd you do it? Kind of thing, like where'd you go and where'd you find these things? And I mean, we have listeners from all over the world, so everyone has a really unique perspective and context that they're in. So what did you find most useful when you started to fill up this shell of a space?
Well, I tried to initially go down the line of just finding resources that might actually help me. Early on in my teaching career, in fact, my first teaching placement, I was given an opportunity to help the school select an architect and refine some design plans for this new wave of open plan teaching spaces or learning spaces that was coming in the early 2000s. And at that stage, I went off and saw an architect. I think his name was Prashner. I might be mispronouncing that, but he had a lot of resources there. So I thought, well, maybe there's something there in terms of the architectural world. Didn't find much at all. I went back to some of my old industrial design resources like Newford's Architects data, which was, that was great in terms of telling me how much space I might have needed or what the orientation of equipment might have been. But a lot of that was very old now. That was, I think, my edition was published in the late 90s. And of course, it still relied heavily on what we'd probably now call siloed design and technology spaces. So that idea that we have a woodwork room and we have a metal shop room and we have a drafting space, which, of course, when you get handed an empty building and they're saying to you, well, actually, you've got one big space to do all of these things in. So I ended up going back to looking at occupational health and safety requirements and looking at aspects and what we'd probably call impacts, so hazards and risks of what to put where. But there wasn't really anything that existed that would actually tell you, what machines you need or what items of plant that you should be able to have, or let alone how much space you actually require between a particular machine and the desks and how you were going to store a lot of these things. So for me, it was really about trying to talk to as many people as I could, maybe go out and see some spaces. But again, this was in a time period where we didn't have a lot of schools that had open plan design and technology spaces, or let alone, STEAM or STEM. Those buzzwords weren't sort of coming in until, maybe 5 years or 6 years down the track after I'd set up this space. So you had to be very innovative in what you did and what you could find. And I'm not too sure what your experience has been, Jason, in terms of finding equipment, but a lot of the things that we were getting into the country at the time were machines that didn't necessarily cut the mark in terms of quality builds, or there was a very large variation in or difference between what you would consider to be sort of cheap, maybe more domestic style machinery, as opposed to industrial machinery. And being a government school, we're often on more conservative budgets. And you'd sort of look at, a lovely panel saw, for example, And then you'd ask how much it was, and it'd be, oh, this is $40,000. Like, oh, I've got a budget of about 10. So that really started me on that journey of, well, there's got to be something that could help other people. And although I'd had a little bit of training as for occupational health and safety in regards to being a staff representative to help people identify issues and bring them to the attention of school leadership, I didn't have any formal qualifications other than what I'd learnt through industrial design. So that really started my journey on occupational health and safety. And it was around 2013 I started my course, because I identified that there wasn't anything there. And I thought, well, someone's got to create it, so why not me? And what is it now? 2020, I finished my degree. And now I'm sort of finding that I've got people coming out of the woodwork, excuse the pun, to ask me, how do we set this up? Or I have got something set up, or I've used a particular company to actually put in all of this machinery, but I don't know if it's compliant. Can you come in and actually have a look and help us? So now I'm doing a lot of consultancy work in and around that area.
I know that most people who are listening who have got their own design space will have empathized with your story, because that's the first thing people walk into. There's this empty room. And in many cases, it's not the school leader's fault, because many of them are not trained for this either. Right. And so they walk in and they say, we know what we want to have. We're just not sure how to do it, Yep. And so I think it's really important that people recognize, that I get asked all the time, how would I do this? How would you set this up? Blah, blah, blah. And you're right. These open space areas, these studios, I guess you could say, or laboratories, they're not easy to plan out. People think it is, but they've seen successful ones because someone spent a lot of time and a lot of money putting them together. And so that's really,
and a bit like, if we approached it from an educational point of view, if we looked at someone like the backwards by design model, it's very similar in approach. We really need to think about how we can even like transdisciplinary design and create these spaces so we can actually have students sort of walking into different areas and talking to different experts in that particular material or processing of material, and then sort of heading back into a design studio and doing whatever they need to do, or having that very fluid way of working and testing and experimenting with materials. It's really interesting, and something that came out in a lot of the research that I've done is that we actually knew more about good workshop design in the 1950s and around that period than what we currently do now. So if you went and tried to Google search and try and dig up resources in any university library, you'll find that we have an abundance of, setting up industrial arts from about the 1920s through to the 1950s, 60s. But most things after about 1970 sort of fall off the radar completely. It wasn't until the late 90s that I believe in the UK that they actually started to develop a standard, and there's now currently a standard that helps people with those sort of things and specifying, what are the risks and hazards of having some particular machines and who should have access to them. But there's still no real great guide in terms of, how to set them up. There is one that floats around that's related to that particular guide, but the research and probably, I suppose, really globally trying to get design and technology teachers in the researching process and back to university and doing master's degrees or doctorates to feed this information and develop our knowledge base is pretty rare. And I think that's a real shame and probably something that we really want to see educators, particularly educators in design technology and holistic theme, doing in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have conversations with people in my professional network all the time regarding new equipment, regarding the safety behind them. And, the longer we use them, the more we realize the hazards and the equipment and the fumes and the whatnot. And so, I mean, we're even redoing some of the spaces in my own school to house the 3D printers so that the off gases are safely disposed of, and I think in many cases they were kind of sold as a safe bet to have in a classroom, and now they're finding, well, hold up, maybe not so much.
Yeah, particularly laser cutters. I've seen some occurrences where people thinking, oh, this is a fantastic tool in the classroom, and it certainly saves time and lessens the hazards that students would maybe occur using more traditional either corded or battery operated portable plant or hand tools. And you might see someone sort of cutting up some plastics, and you sort of just say, well, have you got that vented, and how is it vented, and where does it vent to? Because I have seen in one school where it was being vented and out into the atmosphere, but the duct actually went straight up through the ceiling, through the roof, and it happened to be venting adjacent to a playground where all of the younger students in the school actually play.
Wow, man. I laugh at the humor of someone's short-sightedness, not at the seriousness of the venting.
Yes.
I understand that's what I'm laughing at. So,
Yes,
and that's the thing, is that we have a lot of people who, schools are designed and spaces are designed by people who are not educators and who do not understand all the other bits that go with that, and so the dead spaces are designed and that kind of thing. So very, very fascinating, Andrew. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I know that's a big passion of yours, but I also know you have a new passion. I guess it's new. ANDACOD. Is that how you'd say it?
Yes.
Can you tell me about it?
Sure. It's a weird name. I often get a few people sort of asking me, "Are you a huge fish fan?" It's like, no, I'm not a huge fan of fishing at all. The acronym just comes from myself in the business that I run in doing consultancy work. So that's just Andrew Nicholls Design and Associates. Very creative and inventive name. And the COD comes from Compendium of Design. So this has been a long-term, slow-burning project of mine that early on in the day of teaching, you love to develop your own resources and somehow put them together so you can continually refer to them without constantly printing them out. Now, particularly, we've got the World Wide Web and a fantastic resource that is. So as I've sort of compiled resources and used a few different things, and indeed have been a part of a textbook writing exercise during the late part of the 2000s, I kept some of my work from that process, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could put this online and I could actually reference it with my students and have that as a way of building up my content and my resources, and should I change schools, well, that resource is always with me and I can continually try to improve it. So while I've been doing all of these other things and have had interests in health and safety and learning space design, I've been tinkering away at it, and quite recently I've had enough time to refine that a little bit more. And I thought, well, hang on, this is I've got interest from people wanting to grab some of the graphics that I've created in terms of communicating the design process and even breaking down a 4-step design process into a more elaborate process with phases that actually explain what we're doing in each phase, and even just creating some posters on basic color and drawing styles and a bit of technical drawing. So I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could actually publish this and then see if we can't get some contributors from anywhere we possibly can to actually add to that. So this born the idea of ANDACOD and making it public available on a global website, warts and all. It's certainly not a perfect site at the moment, but one I'm very much tinkering away with. So the idea of ANDACOD really now has become this site in which we could collaborate as design and technology teachers and provide resources for both beginning teachers or expert teachers, or indeed students who have got a flair for design and wanting to sort of cut through everything that's available to them and the countless hours that you might spend watching cat videos on YouTube, for example, or trying to find that right person to actually show you that bit of skill or knowledge that you're after. So what I've tried to do is piece together bits of information and make it accessible for people. So there's, as a part of the website, there's a series of pages there at the moment that sort of hopes to explain the design process. There is a built-in glossary that as soon as we add a particular term to that glossary, it then defines it across the whole website. So if there's a particular term that you're unfamiliar with, and if I pick a word that students often stumble on, which might be things like aesthetics or anthropological data, it highlights itself in a particular color different to the text around it, and you can wave your mouse over it, and then it gives you a nice definition. Some of those I think are probably still a little bit educational about or academic about, and probably need a little bit of help refining those. But there's also other pages on there that, if you do spend your hours watching YouTube clips, there's some fantastic resources out there in terms of different disciplines. There's been some widely talked about videos or video links to companies like Seymour Powell and Designing Dream Machines, for example, which I think is just an absolute fantastic resource that I show every one of my students, even though it's a bit cringeworthy now because it was done back in the 90s, I think, with all the Seymour Powell crew going around the world designing products. But it just showcases that process and the creative way in which products can come from an idea. And, I always love Dick's definition of, the way in which designers like plate spinning and, the fact that he struggles to put his food processor back in the right spot always makes me giggle. And, other links to who's one I can think of at the moment. So like for drawing, like Spencer Nugent, I love his work and watching him just come up with a sketch and a marker rendering, with just such ease. And I sort of sit there and think how long it took me to struggle with my confidence of drawing and understanding of perspective, and he just does it so perfectly. And there's lots more that we've got in plan for it in terms of expanding it. We'd love to see teachers jump on board and register and then offer to send through whatever resource is in whatever format, in no matter how good or bad they think it is. And I'd love to see people sharing all of that. I don't know what it's like where you're currently teaching, Jason, or what it's like for your listeners, but certainly here in Victoria, and no doubt across Australia at the moment, we've got a huge shortage of design and technology teachers. We are at that point at the moment where a lot of our teachers who started their careers back in maybe the 70s or 80s are now getting to the point where it's, no, I'm tapping out. But with that, of course, they're leaving the industry with a wealth of knowledge in terms of their craft, no matter whether they teach the more contemporary approaches to design and technology or a more the traditional material-based practitioner. We want to get a snapshot of that before everyone sort of leaves, but we also want a rich pot of information that our generation of tomorrow can actually pick up from and learn from, and engage our next round of students in designing products that will be around in the next 50 years, or certainly start to concentrate on developing products that are going to resolve our environmental issues that we are certainly going to have in the next 50 to 100 years.
It sounds to me like this is a real passion project for you, and it's one of those that your sort of side hustle that you have going on to help the good of the profession. And so I do appreciate you putting that together, Andrew, and it's a sensational site, and I know that listeners will want to come visit that, and I will definitely make sure that there's a link in the show notes so folks can come through and visit. And so you've alluded to some challenges that you've had putting this together. What would you say have been the main things that have been the most challenging for you in setting this up, and how have you addressed those challenges?
Wow, great question. I think initially there's always that concern when you dabble in things like web design that you don't quite know what you're doing, and you're trying to piece it together, and it's sort of got to look professional and it's got to work well. They were probably my biggest issues initially, was just piecing it together. What platform do I use? How do I get this on here? How do I do this? How do I do it so it doesn't look like it was designed back in the days of web design? Taking all of that aside, it's really just the time and the content that takes every ounce of practice to get it looking and feeling as though that it could be a possible site that people would want to visit and want to use. And even drawing from your own resources that you start to look at and think, oh, gee, have I done a good enough job on that? Is it really going to respond to the needs of students or help them in some way? And that's really where I'm at with the site at the moment, is trying to get that content up on there and know that it's to that standard that people will be happy with to use or pick up. It really goes back to and even just asking for contributors and trying to promote that idea of let's share our resources and as teachers let's look at what we are hoping to achieve and how we're trying to pass on the knowledge and the skills that we've learnt, but do it in a way in which we can support each other and do it in a way that we can respond to each other's work in a professional light and help build other people's capacity and improve upon that. And of course, always make it enjoyable for our students then to pick up and look at and go, oh, wow, I never knew that so much effort went into making that product, or that there is a real purpose in, as much as I hate to say the word, but it often gets used by students as I don't like the theory behind what I'm learning about. I want to make, but I don't necessarily want to learn theory. So it's trying to find that balance between how much theory do we put up and how do we write that in such a way that it's still welcoming to people who are learning it, as opposed to those of us who have mastered it and can understand it, but maybe we haven't quite mastered the skill in producing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, you're taking risks, and I think anyone in this profession that we're both in would appreciate you taking risks. So thank you for putting that together and continuing to push through every single day, because I know it is a labor of love. So I do appreciate it. And I'm sure that you're going to continue to gather steam as you continue to build the site. The site's beautiful, so congratulations on that. I was commenting to you earlier, I love the graphics, I love the style. It's really slick. So just keep doing that, man. I'm sure you've learned things you never knew you would learn, right?
Oh, well, yeah, my HTML and CSS understanding is much better than when I first started, and a little bit of PHP in there as well. So it's amazing the skills that you pick up and even how you can use those. It's funny how word gets around that you've got a website here or a website there, and people have a look at it and go, oh, wow, you must be really good at it. It's like, well, there's some tricks of the trade in there that we'll just keep under our hat for the moment. But, it has even had people tapping me on the shoulder to say, hey, can you come in and actually teach a year 7 or a year 8 IT class, which is always interesting. You go in and say, yeah, okay, well, I can teach you all about, let's talk about imaging and manipulating images on Photoshop and Illustrator. Now let's do a little bit of web design. Okay, well, let's look at the W3 schools and let's see what we can learn there from as a resource. And which is still great because it challenges you as an educator, and it puts you in that zone where you're learning with students. And it's reminds me of a conversation I was having over the last couple of weeks with people in terms of letting go of that idea of, well, I suppose what we'd call is power knowledge. So that old didactic way of teaching, it's the master standing up in front of the class or the sage on the stage sort of thing, and transition to more of the guide on the side and start to learn with students. And I think when you start to do that, then students can start to see that you're vulnerable too. And sometimes it's even just to demonstrate to students, hey, you know what? I might be a teacher, that might be my label, but I'm still a learner. And learning just never stops. And that those type of things are really important, and that's what I try to get back to students, is that, hey, I started out doing this. I never thought I'd be a teacher, but here I am. I never thought I'd sell photographic gear, but done that too. Never thought I'd be a web designer. I'm not a professional web designer, but I've been able to piece together my own website, and here it is. And yeah, there's some clunky bits here and there and some broken links and maybe some things that don't quite work quite well yet. But you know what? I'll take the feedback. I like that feedback. The more I find out about things, the more I can fix things, and I'll give credit to some image sites. They're not my graphics. I'd love to be able to do them. I do manipulate them slightly, but I certainly don't sit down, or I don't have the time to sit down and do the amazing graphics that are on there. But the idea of that, and I sort of thought the imagery, I wanted a nice style to be able to publicize or make public the site and hand it over to other contributors. But I was sort of looking for a particular look and feel, but something that might have been quite trendy and inviting. I originally started out with a number of different images and photos, and it's amazing how things just quite it doesn't gel. It just didn't look right. It started to feel a bit clunky. And then once I went to that graphic line, everything just started to fall in place. And I thought, yeah, this feels right. It looks, and for some, I don't know what it is, but I tend to like that graphic look as opposed to set up photos that can start to look a bit generic, and particularly when you're wanting people to be innovative and different and a bit edgy. That nice illustration look, I think, goes a long way.
Yeah, I really dig it. I think it's very cool, kind of Liechtenstein pop art kind of comic book style, which is really fun. And so if people haven't seen it, it's a great time for them to go check out your site. So
certainly is. And sign up. Yeah, sign up. Let me know if there's anything that you'd like to contribute. I'm really after, any type of content at all. Anything from lesson plans to unit planners, or just articles that have been written on design, or even if someone wants to see an article on, maybe what does work for a design and technology workshop, or, anything at all that could help students and teachers teach design and technology, or, I'd like to label it as transdisciplinary STEM or STEAM. I like to get those full stops out of the word and make sure that there's a definitive link between all of those letters in the acronym. Then I'd love to see it up there and sharing it with the world.
Totally agreed. So Andrew, quick question for you, rapid fire. What book would you ask everyone to stop right now and read?
I'm split on this. I don't know if there's one. I'm a huge fan, and I think I'd have to go back to and maybe go a bit old school on this and say that if there is one that I had to be locked down to, I'd definitely say find yourself a copy of Design for the Real World by Victor Papanek and read it. Fantastic. It's a must. Yeah.
I will add that to, I have a Goodreads shelf that I put people's book recommendations on, and that one now will be on there. So thank you for that. And so if people want to get in touch with you, of course you have your website. What are some other ways to get in touch with you through social media, or if they want to find out more about the work that you're doing?
Lots. I think these keep me just as busy as developing the website. So I've got a few handles all over the place. On Twitter, you can find me at ANDACOD, so ANDACOD. I'm also under the tag of AND_DLSS. Don't ask me what that acronym all stands for. So I must have come to Twitter at the wrong time, because I plugged in a few little tags and I just couldn't find one that worked. I think it was learning space design and safety or something like that. But ANDA_DLSS.
I will make sure all of that is in the show notes, and so people can click right away and they don't have to worry about spelling it out. So that way it's easy access. But most certainly, yeah, I'll definitely have you tagged in all the publicity and PR for the podcast episode. But this has been such a great time talking with you. I really appreciate it, Andrew, and you taking time out of your busy day. You're a very busy guy, so I really do appreciate that.
Sincerely appreciate the offer. That was amazing. I think conversations like this are just brilliant, because it gives every one of us an opportunity to get these topics out in the open, heard, and even just to get people knowing that, the things that run around in your head, in your classroom, and maybe your learning region are still getting talked about worldwide. And it's, these types of conversations have really got to get out there to open things up and share the knowledge that we all have about design and technology.
Thank you so much for your time. And I would love to have you back on after the website continues to grow. Maybe we can have an update in the near future.
Certainly.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Designcast. I'm Jason, your host, and I produced and created this podcast. If you have any input, I would love to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon. I am so excited to announce the launch of a new podcast network called DNA Podcast Network. The Design Network Alliance, or DNA, was founded by Ivo Hanan and myself as a result of DesignCast number 16. We talked all about the need to connect design educators globally. DNA is a collective group of like-minded design educators from around the world. We have one simple mission: to connect design and STEAM educators with each other and with designers that want to make a difference in design education to make it better for future generations. The DNA Podcast Network is a hub for podcasts that cover the topics around design and technology, design thinking, STEAM, and STEM education. If you are interested in hearing more great content, head over to www.dnapodcastnetwork.ga today. Click on the thumbnail of the podcast that you want to hear and enjoy. If you have any other podcasts that you enjoy that cover similar topics, please feel free to get in touch with me and let me know so that I can look at adding them to the network. Finally, spread the word. Share with your network and your PLN and use the hashtag DNA Podcast Network.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.